Welcome back also to those online. Thank you all for joining us. I think we've had a very invigorating time so far, and I'm sure this session will continue to be invigorating. The theme on reframing education and forced displacement follows very nicely from the conversations that we've just been having, and we've got some wonderful speakers. We've already met Dr. Maha Shuayb and Dr. Cathrine Brun, who are both the co-directors of the Centre for Lebanese Studies. Maha, as mentioned, is also with us in the Faculty of Education and connected with the Real Centre at the University of Cambridge, and she was up until very recently the British Academy Bilateral Chair for Education in Conflict, which I think is very fitting for these discussions, and did a huge amount of work on lots of outputs from that. So do look on the Centre for Lebanese Studies website for all the work that both Cathrine, Maha and other colleagues have done. And Catherine's work is as a human geographer with research interests concerned with forced migration and conflict, housing and home, thinking about ethics, I think, which everybody here is also very mindful of in the context of the issues we're discussing, and so on. Many other things, I should say. Dr. Laila Kadiwal is an associate professor at the University College London Institute of Education, and her students are here as well, so welcome to you. Thank you for coming. You're very welcome. And she's a scholar of critical and decolonial knowledge and pedagogy, and looks at the intersections of climate justice, conflict, war, extraction, authoritarianism, gender, Islamophobia, and the weaponization of identities. So I think you've got a lot there to unpack. So we look forward to
come together.
Yeah, we're going to hear all about it. Really interesting, and also Layla's work is really exciting. And I've also been hearing about her teaching, and I wish I was on her teaching program. So Ali Ahmadi is a PhD candidate at Anglia Ruskin University, where his research explores the access to and progression of displaced students in higher education. So a very nice link, I think, to some of the discussions just now, with a particular focus on the structural and institutional barriers they face. He's also a research assistant here at the University of Cambridge, so got more than one hat. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. So I think we'll be going in that order. So we'll start with Maha and Cathrine. Cathrine.
Thanks.
Yes.
So the title of this presentation has changed slightly from the program. It's called Education in Forced Displacement, Unsettling the Field. And this is the title of a book that is coming out soon that Maha and I have edited together, which is a project that emerged out of the British Academy chair that Pauline was just talking about. And also many conversations that began when Maha and I started collaborating around 10 years ago. I think it's our 10-year anniversary this year. And I think we were united by the view that there is an inherent tension in providing education in forced displacement through a humanitarian approach. And this has been, I think, a core of many of our discussions. So the book that is coming out at University of Liverpool Press, a British Academy book series, sits at the intersection of refugee studies and education studies. And I forgot that. This is the wrong. Okay, I think you need to click because it's going to click many times. So we have a group of very, very great authors who have tried to speak to this issue of unsettling the field of education in forced displacement. It in a way started in 2022, 2023, and since then I think there have been so many important developments in the field of forced migration education. So in a way, the project has sat with us for this time, and it had forced us to reflect on some of these issues at the same time. You can go there. Yes, perfect. We have seen the inability of forced migration scholars in particular to engage with genocide alongside broader limits to critical scholarship. I think that was mentioned earlier. I think there are limits to the way critical scholarship is being pursued today. We have also seen funding decline after many years of growth and identified an emerging critique of dominant approaches to educating forcibly displaced populations. And this raises important questions about the role of academic research in the field and the need for greater critical reflexivity. So our aim in this book is to challenge the status quo and to contribute to thinking about how the field might change. So we will present the 4 core arguments of the book before we turn to some of the implications that we see. And I will skip this and go straight to the 4 so that we don't waste more time. First of all, there's been a limited conceptual engagement in the field of education for refugees. The paradox, in a way, is that the field has suffered from conceptual engagement when education is, on the one hand, recognized as a universal right, but access to education has become increasingly conditional. Modern education systems are built on assumptions of stability, linear progression, and membership in a recognized political community. Learners are expected to move through these educational pathways within defined territories and under state authority. But as we know, displacement disrupts all these assumptions. It interrupts educational trajectories, destabilizes place-based systems, and often places individuals outside clear structures of citizenship and belonging. But education systems remain organized around these assumptions. To some extent, they're shaped by methodological nationalism, the idea that education naturally belongs within the nation state. And as a result, education systems have struggled to respond systematically to the realities of displacement. So, related to this reality, the field has expanded rapidly without equivalent conceptual development. And over the past 20 years, a distinct field of research and practice has emerged. And key milestones include the Dakar Education for All agenda, the establishment of the INEE that we have heard about, major refugee crisis that has really influenced the discourse, the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, number 4, the Global Compact on Refugees that we also heard about. And also, I think we could mention creation of Education Cannot Wait as a way of thinking, about relief and education. So these developments have generated significant growth in funding, policy attention, programming, and academic scholarship. It has and must be credited for leading to increased access to primary and secondary education. Education is also now recognized as a humanitarian priority in ways that would have been difficult to imagine 2 decades ago. But the field grew faster than its conceptual foundation. So if we move to the next slide, Maha. We continue to use multiple labels, as we have talked about: refugee education, education in emergencies, education in conflict, education in crisis, and education in forced displacement. And these labels reflect quite unresolved questions about who the field is for, its purpose, responsibility for provision, and how rights, belonging, and membership are understood. So, in a way, humanitarianism became the field's default logic. The field is organized around emergency response, management, delivery, and access. And these achievements have expanded educational opportunities, as I said, but humanitarian dominance has narrowed the question we ask. We focus on educational delivery rather than the political and social structures that shape the exclusion. Questions of justice, power, citizenship, and membership remain secondary. So in these ways, there is a mismatch between education provision and displaced people's reality. Educational responses tend to favor standardized, formal, certified models, but displaced populations often experience fragmented pathways, multiple languages, uncertain futures, and constrained agency. As a result, education systems continue to reproduce exclusion even while expanding access. So our final argument, before I move to Maha, is academic complicity. Academia is not simply an observer of these dynamics, as we now have heard in the panels before. It's implicated in them. Research helps legitimize particular understandings of problems and solutions. And the production of knowledge on refugee education remain highly unequal. In one of our chapters in the book, we show that around 90% of academic research is produced in the global north. Research agendas are often shaped by donor priorities, demand for policy relevance, humanitarian funding structures, and pressures within the neoliberal university. So as a result, academic scholarship can reinforce the assumptions and power relations that structure the field. So together, these four arguments suggest that the challenge facing refugee education is not simply one of access or delivery, but also conceptual and political. If the field is to move forward, it must engage more critically with questions of rights, belonging, power, and membership, while creating greater space for displaced people to shape that educational provision and knowledge production. Over to you, Matt.
What time?
Oh, yeah. I think it's about 7-8 minutes.
Okay, great. So we have. Thank you very much. So, and I want to come back to Judith, a point that you mentioned. I was at the Global Refugee Forum, and I attended the panel that was on education. And I wrote actually a blog in the New Humanitarian in response to that panel, because one thing that has happened within the humanitarian education sector is when you have also this charity or this donor-driven model that's funding education, you need to obviously have outcomes that are measured, as you said. And that pushes for almost, instead of multiple pathways, one pathway. And that's this one size fits all. And now the whole push is on including refugees in the host curriculum of the country. And that Lebanon is a case study where actually it doesn't work. And we can see actually many countries where it doesn't work. It might look great on paper, but what we see from the research following these children is access rates actually, although they start as good, they dwindle to bare minimum. In Lebanon at the moment, enrollment rate amongst refugees is less than 30%. Continuation for them is less than, grade 9 is less than 1% of those 30% who join. So we're talking about a large sector who actually drops in. Now, host countries do benefit in some ways, and then they can tolerate refugees more, but the return for refugee communities can be questionable. Also, refugees are not just students, they are teachers as well, and these are often excluded from these programs. Also, there's the other issue of question, the question of funding. So we've just done a study because now in Lebanon the discussion is let's close second shifts, because also these refugees don't learn with the nationals; they learn in parallel systems to the nationals. And to what extent, I remember interviewing a parent who would introduce his child as, my son is a Syrian refugee morning shift, because there were small numbers of Syrian children in the morning shift. And that became almost like an identity, because the morning shifts are better than the second shift. So you even create a hierarchy within the system. What we are trying to say is we need multiple pathways. We need also responses from the communities, because also when you have the humanitarian sector, it really washed away community-led initiatives. So now in Lebanon, we've just finished a study on what will happen if the funding stops for the second shift for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And the vast majority of children will be out of school. But also what we've lost in those 15 years is all these community-led initiatives and experimentations and trials that now will have to reinvent themselves and start from zero. So we need to think carefully about the solutions that we want to roll out. Okay, sorry, I can't see 5 minutes. So, but now there is a moment, because everyone now working in the sector says, okay, there's funding cuts, we're all might lose our job next year, and I think all of us are working like crazy to get secure grants so we can keep our employees and staff working. But then others are saying, well, is there a possibility then? If we lose our job, maybe we will lose this dependency and we can think a bit more creatively. And I think foundations have a role, because also foundations can push for a different narrative. In my experience of looking at some good partnerships where foundations can actually push beyond the more conservative paradigms. So this is why, we're saying maybe there's a moment to create something. But that's something, before we decide how we create it, we need to think a bit more about, okay, what kind of education we're talking about. So there's a big question about the meaning of education in context of forced displacement. Do we really need the same trajectory that we use in the nation state system where there are no crises, or could we think of something a bit more flexible? Do we need one size fits all? Should all go into the public system, or should we think of different systems? I think the Afghani, and probably Ali, you will know more, but the Afghani experience was a bit different, where you have many types of education that were happening. There's a big issue of refugee governance. as the humanitarian sector expanded, refugee agency really dwindled. And even when we talk about localization, we're only talking on the level of implementation. And with the humanitarian logic, there's always the idea, okay, let's find one model, let's scale it up. But does it really create a change is the question that we really, and sustainable change and impact. And scholars have really a critical role now to help reimagine what this space would look like. They're not the only ones, and I'm for sure I don't think we're at any advantage to the practitioners or to the policymakers. I think it's time for all of us to really come together and think, okay, do we need to rethink education in what sense and for how we want to do it? But we as academics, we need to really check in with ourselves. We have benefited so much, and Mario's Novelli chapter is all about this, and I think Laila will talk about the implicated subject of how we have benefited through consultancies, through grants, to advance our career, but really have we pushed for the best solutions. Okay, so now I think we are talking with many other colleagues within this room and outside is how we can create these different types of coalition, different types of spaces, because even our academic networks are complicit in this. We know that even our academic networks are funded by many of these actors who, we'd have to also take their voices into considerations. I will, and obviously our teaching is critical to this. So what kind of teaching we can do within classrooms. One last point, I mentioned it in my opening speech, but research ethics is a site where we really need to redefine what do we consider as ethical research, because that form filling that we're doing within our institutions is anything but really clears our ethics and consciousness. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
So I can't get up.
If you get up, the people online can't see you.
Oh, okay. Because sitting down, I will be.
I think it's okay to stand up, but
Okay, so I'll
those online
stand
will
here.
It's up to you. No, do whatever is most comfortable.
You can
for you.
stand here, it's fine, then they will see you.
Yeah,
Is that okay with you?
yeah. Can people online see me? They can hear me? Brilliant. Good afternoon, everyone, and whatever time zone people online are. Really wonderful to see our students from UCL here, and really wonderful to be among colleagues and friends here. So I have 3 parts in this. I'm going to learn as I speak. Managed. Thank you, Janice. So a story from Brighton. That's where I live. And then a metaphor to just go a little bit deeper to understand what's happening. And the third thing, how we might reimagine alternatives. So, sorry, I'm an educator, as you can see in my blood. I can't just sit and talk. So what happened in Brighton? So on 13 June, which is just last Saturday, a few days ago, you may have seen the pictures. Brighton Station was faced with 2 possibilities, right? 2 possibilities of what does it mean to have nationhood, borders, belonging, identity of the nation. So one vision comes from stop the boats, mass deportation, the far right and fascistic ideological network. And the second possibility came from the grassroots mobilization, thousands of people who live locally. And actually, Brighton is a city of immigrants and migrants from all over, from all kinds of margins. So there was another idea of nation and belonging and identity was put forward. You had just about 300 people waving the flag, and you had about 4,000 people trying to stop them at the Brighton station, and all roads leading to Brighton city were blocked by thousands of Brightonians because they did not want fascistic and far-right ideologies to march into the town, despite police wanting it to march into the town. So you see the institutional support, the top-down support is growing for and not for the kind of vision that grassroots movements and people actually want. Now, let's understand this vision, far-right and fascistic vision, which is marching on our streets, in our computers, through our algorithms, etc., funded by some of the billionaires and the first trillionaire of the world. Guess who? Now, the remigration is the concept that many scholars argue is the concept of ethnic cleansing. And the ideology of the nation in this is the racial purity, right? Which is homogeneous, which promotes heteronormativity and cultural superiority. So these are actually white supremacist heteropatriarchal idea of the nationhood. And minoritized group, so that is the self which is seen as under threat, versus the other, which are actually social, politically, economically, culturally more at the margin. So these minoritized others are seen as the threat to the self of the nation, right? And then there is what kind of threat? Threat to our women, our nation, our religion, our culture, our identity. So all the emotions, earlier Michelle was talking about the politics of emotion. This is politics of fear, right? So there is nostalgia that we had glorious past, which these invaders have destroyed. So we have to now expel them. Now, and it normalizes violence, the politics of expulsion and detention, and that is seen as patriotic duty. So those who are marching, many of them had the group called Patriots, right? Southeast Patriots. So that patriotism is actually is the politics of violence here in this ideology. Promotes misogyny, climate denial, conspiracy theories, elevates strongman leader, undermines democracy. Media then amplifies supportive, because media can be bought, right? In India, we have Godi media. So media mainstream media amplifies the narrative supportive to this vision, couched in the language which sounds probably rational, right? Dissent is separate, activist jail, protest restricted. A lot of anti-fascist protesters in Brighton were sprayed by incapacitating sprays. And the universities are also targeted. Oh, these are liberal universities by the far right. And divert attention. So what happens is it diverts attention away from the global inequalities, the planetary crisis that all of us are in, and the structural injustices that affect different populations differently. And it diverts all that anger that generates from all these structural conditions onto the marginalized group. And this is how fascism works. Instead of anger going upward, where it should be directed to the policies and structure, the billionaire funding comes to divert attention, the anger and the grievance downward. That is the concept of scapegoating. The goat doesn't actually commit any crime, yeah? It is just scapegoat, right? So the politics of hate ultimately serves no one. Not a single person who is sat in this room, our families, future of our families, no matter which political spectrum we are, it doesn't even serve far right itself, right? Not the funders, it probably benefits them. So that's one vision that came to Brighton. And then what did Brighton do? Right. So Brighton organized. Look at the number of people. And what is the messaging here? Love Brighton, hate racism. No fascists, no tyrants, no to hate. Yes, absolutely. So there is an intersectionality of struggle here. This grassroots, bottom-up mobilization was not about a single issue. You know, sometimes bourgeois location talk about identity politics. Oh, this is identity politics. You know, when you see from the bottom, people don't have single issue in life. You know, gender, hunger, energy bills, inequalities, unemployment, all of this can be affecting the same household. So if you look from the bottom up, you cannot talk about identity politics because people cannot live with identity politics. There is always intersectionality of struggles. And what were the messaging here? Inequality, not immigrants. Now, earlier in the morning, somebody was asking, how do we push narrative in a simple way? And I thought this was a really simple way of educating each other, right? Immigrants didn't raise your energy bills. They blame immigrants, so you don't blame billionaires. Then there was this big thing somewhere on the floor. Sick of inequality? Farage and company don't care. Your anger lies the pockets of fascist billionaires. Reform will split communities. The NHS will rot. Real bad men don't need small boats. They have got a super yacht, right? And there is no planet B. We're all immigrants. So you see the kind of education that emerges from the grassroots and emerges from the streets, universities of the streets, is brilliant. And now why does it matter? Why does it matter for every single person who is sat here that we should talk about this? Because the UN has warned that the early warning signs of genocide are on rise everywhere. Genocide, usually I ask my students, what do you think, what comes to your mind when you hear the word genocide? And sometimes you get response that it's the one event of mass killing. Genocide is not that. Genocide is a process. That mass killing is the final stage of that process. And that process starts with the politics of hate. Us and the threat other. That's where genocidal process starts from. So that's why I think we shouldn't underestimate whoever we are in this room across the political spectrum, because it's not going to, because we also have duty to be good ancestors to our own children and grandchildren when democracy is being eroded. And this is what is happening. So the threat, Paul Gilroy says, the threat of fascism is always nearer to us than we even imagine. So this is what the situation of Europe is, but it's not, I'm treating this as Mike sometimes. Strange. That shows how much I'm used to, public engagement. Yeah. And this is not the situation only in Europe, but Europe is playing a big part in what's happening around the world too, in terms of oh, okay, I've got it. There is big money that gets invested. A lot of money is coming from the United States. There is a report that has come out mapping fascism. What are the funders and actors involved? I highly recommend. It's on Reactionary International webpage. A lot of funding. So when Musk, oh God, all right. So all this we know. So there is a politics of extraction, and any conversation of humanitarian aid, when it tells a single story, how much we are helping with our liberal rights and inclusion paradigm, but not telling another story of extraction, it is seriously damaging. And that makes us culpable. Now, here is the distinction. Implicated subjects, we all are. Because we all are interconnected. We are all part of global capital system in ways through my this technology, to use of my phones, to our clothes, everything. We are all implicated subjects in racial capitalism. But we become culpable when we see what's going on and yet churn out the stories that don't address the problem. Right? So that culpability is something we need to seriously think. Let's think about, and that's where Maha asked me, I shouldn't remove this slide, that humanitarianism does not remain simply this idea of, oh, we're doing inclusion with all these standards, but it becomes murderous humanitarianism. And this is the critic comes from the anti-colonial struggle for a long time. That on one hand, extraction keeps going, imperialism keep going, the oil imperialism, the critical mineral extraction, the arms business keeps profiting. It benefits the West in a superbly interesting ways. Not everybody in the West, because there is South in the West as well. So that humanitarianism simply becomes another civilizing mission, and we need to recognize its sophisticated form today. Detention centers, a lot of aid also goes into detaining refugees and asylum seeker and displaced people. That's another politics of containment. We don't have time today, probably, but that's something we need to look at. Now, what is the solution? My proposal is that we move towards reparative imagination, no matter wherever we are in our politics, or whether we're civil servants, or we're academics, or we are activists, or students, or practitioners. Now, what do I suggest? I have some questions to propose here. Maybe we need another symposium to then sit down with these questions. So asking different questions. Now, one, how do we challenge assumptions of detached, neutral, ahistorical, and benevolent researcher, educator, practitioner traveling from the global north to the global south to help? Instead, how do we understand our roles within systems of harm, opening spaces for more accountable ways of engaging with the global majority, both in the global north and global south? Let's break the binary. Let's think about global majority across the planet and think from the shared liberation, because when fascism is on the rise, nobody is safe. So this model that has for long dominated, I think we need to go and hospice the house of modernity. And that's my second provocation comes from Vanessa Andreotti's wonderful book, wonderful work, that the idea of progress, development, modernity that has become normalized is part of problem. Because that modernity is based on genocides, ecocides, epistemicides for several hundred years, right from 1492 when Columbus went to so-called discovered the Americas. Enclosures were taking place here too. People were being displaced here too. Witch hunt of women, witch burning of women was happening here too. So sometimes we tend to think about colonization out there and colonized legacy as a past. No, colonization continues. Sorry, that was my reminder to myself to shut up.
I wasn't bad with this, but I was enjoying it.
Oh, thank you. If you're enjoying, can I take another minute?
Enjoying is maybe the wrong word.
So a lot of our humanitarian solution still wants to put people back into the house of modernity, but the house of modernity has reached the beyond capacity of the planet because it's rooted in extraction of the nature. So we need to think differently. That's where we are in the middle thing. And here, the south of the north is being made to be angry with the south of the south. That's what was happening in Brighton. So what changes when we see land, water, air, animals, plants, not as data, not as resources, but as relations? So thinking from planetary perspective. How do we transgress the civilizing trope that real comparative and international education research and teaching happens only in the global south, and instead recognize interconnected struggles across the global majority? How do we nurture deeper education about global injustices and foster ethical solidarities locally and globally? How might our spaces become a safer, braver spaces in which we move beyond? Now, this is very important because we face a lot of defensiveness and fragility. There is no need to, because we're together have to be together fighting a rise of fascism today and the planetary extinction today. So we need to be able to confront white privilege, structural racism, racial capitalism, imperialism, without quickly reaching for the desire for quick redemption, innocence, or atonement, in order to disrupt the modern colonial modes of being that harm all of us. Let's be together in understanding. Now the last slide. How do we bring collective knowledges generated by collectives, youth movements, activists, critical scholars from the global margins? So earlier, Meisner was saying, absolutely amazing. That's a very important part of reparative imagination, that instead of thinking global westernized university can trickle down their liberal knowledge everywhere without being anti-racist, I think we need to learn from the global margins where people have already been for a very long time producing critical knowledge, having faced the mining extraction. How do we recognize numerous networks of mutual aid and the issue of extraction rather than making it about aid? It really bothers me. Every time I hear the word aid, I feel gaslighted and triggered. The reason is, on one hand, these very imperial systems destroyed the networks of mutual aid systematically. Even though people continue with it, aid plays a very minimal part, and yet aid gets glorified. It's just glorifying the white patriarchal supremacy. So we need to stop that single story, recognize the mutual aid system that already in place, and the issue of extraction that need to be addressed, rather than making it about single story of how we helped 2 dependents out of thousands that we are putting in the water. How do we cultivate spaces where critical scholars, students, and practitioners from the global margin can breathe and be truly heard? Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And I think a lot of food for thought and answers to Laila's questions in a moment, hopefully. But over to you. You wanting to start?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am a first year. Does it work? I'm a first year PhD student at Anglia Ruskin University. There is a slight change in the title of my presentation today, and my study focuses on refugees, higher education, and particularly on universities of sanctuary. The title of my studies at the moment is Universities of Sanctuary, Exploring Higher Education Provision and the Experience of Forcibly Displaced Students in England. This is an overview of my presentation for today. First, I will talk a little bit about the context and the hostile environment. And second, I will speak about the research rationale, including the universities of sanctuary. And then I'll move to the research problem. And I'll also lay out my research questions. And then I'll speak about some key findings from literature about universities of sanctuary so far. I'm a first year, so I don't have any primary data at the moment. And finally, I will conclude with how this study will build on the literature and how will contribute in the young field of refugee education. In terms of context, there is a large number of displaced students in the UK. For example, there is about more than 500,000 refugees in the UK, and there is, as we know, a large number of asylum seekers, and the number of asylum seekers are rising since 2021. Last year alone, for example, there were about 100,000 asylum applications in the UK, but also UK is receiving a lot of displaced people, displaced population through some bespoke resettlement schemes, such as that of Ukrainians, and the UK also had some for Afghanistan, and the Ukraine alone, through the program for Ukraine alone, about 230,000 people moved to the UK, and also about another 30,000 moved through the Afghan resettlement. But also there are other like small routes, for example, people on humanitarian protection, and also refugees who are moving to the UK through the UNHCR resettled programs. The number is small, but the overall number of displaced population in the UK could add up about 1 million people. On the other hand, when it comes to higher education, first of all, displaced people globally is underrepresented. It is only about 9% according to the UNHCR. But in the UK, there is no data indicating what percentage of forcibly displaced population are actually in higher education. This number, the 9%, is like a much better number than the 2019, which was only 1%, but way lower than the general population, which is about 45%, and way, way lower than the UK general population, which is about 80% can access higher education. In terms of the hostile environment, we heard a lot about this today. As we all know, there is little legal routes for people fleeing persecution and conflict. And according to many studies, that then lead to a lot of irregular arrivals. And then that's people are refugees and asylum seekers who try irregular routes. They are criminalized, and there's a lot of securitization narratives around that as well. As we heard this morning, waiting is a technology of control. The long wait is there. The long wait for asylum application at the moment, for those who, for example, get rejected in the asylum application, then they go to appeal court. And at the moment, the average waiting time is 6 to 7 weeks. At the moment, about 90,000 people are in the backlog in the Court of Appeal. So all of this actually hinder the prospect of higher education for forcibly displaced people, particularly asylum seekers. Precarious asylum policies, it's always been the issue. It's global, but particularly in the UK, as we know, like last year, the Restoring Order and Control policy, for example, now there is discretionary asylum support, and there is also temporary refugee status, 2.5 years, and then it could live like an asylum seeker can live in the UK for 20 years or more. They still couldn't have their, they cannot have their resettlement or ILR, for example. Again, in terms of higher education, there's no national framework in the UK for forcibly displaced people higher education. There's no state fund for that. So universities of sanctuary is basically an institutional response to the hostile environment and the representation of forcibly displaced people in higher education. First, so it is a stream of the City of Sanctuary. So City of Sanctuary is a national organization. It has multiple streams, and one of them is Universities of Sanctuary, and then they got like Schools of Sanctuary, Churches of Sanctuary, Gardens of Sanctuary. Universities of Sanctuary is one stream of the City of Sanctuary. Initially, they started in 2005 with the University of Sheffield being the first University of Sanctuary. And the process is that they apply to the City of Sanctuary, to the University of Sanctuary stream of City of Sanctuary, and they agree to a set of minimum criteria that they will do for forcibly displaced students, and then they get their status and they become a University of Sanctuary. At the moment, there is 57 University of Sanctuary across the UK. Some of those minimum criteria could be like offering a scholarship for undergraduate and postgraduate courses. But also they should have a dedicated member of staff, and also they should have a 3-year plan. And there's a long list of, not very long list of minimum criteria. But then later on, I'll talk about that. This is a welcome initiative, of course. This is a good initiative, but there are some limitations on a practical level, but also on a conceptual level. On a practical level, funding issue for universities is a thing, and also there's not a lot of staff capacity and other practical issues and challenges that they have. On a conceptual level, again, there is this risk of power and paternalism in universities, like people of sanctuary being the recipient of aid, as it is a common thing in the humanitarian sector. But also like in the new liberal higher education is university can be really a place of sanctuary. Those are also some issues, conceptual issues that is there around University of Sanctuary. So my research is on University of Sanctuary. As we know, there's 57 universities at the moment having the title of University of Sanctuary. They are providing different scholarships, different supports. And why I'm researching this is this is obviously a good initiative, but there's not a lot of study on this. First of all, there are some studies on universities of sanctuary. First, mainly they focus on either universities of sanctuary or the experience of students or sanctuary scholars in those universities. But also I have not found there's one or two studies, and they also focus on a single case or two cases that focus on the full range of universities of sanctuary, not a lot of study in there. But more importantly, there is the current studies at the moment are not treating displaced students as heterogeneous group. Well, they say, well, yeah, like people come from different parts of the world, they have different route of arrivals, there's gender issues, and also the postcode lottery is there. Where do they live now in the UK, and all those things. But there is not a lot of studies, and that's why I am studying this. And now these are at the moment my research questions: how universities of sanctuary in England are supporting them, and how those support actually promote inclusion, and what are the challenges for refugee students. These are some of the findings from literature around universities of sanctuary. The first thing is sustainability issue. Funding is always a problem. There are some universities who were very generous at the beginning, but then after some year they stopped totally. Also, the funding issue is another thing, that they don't meet the minimum criteria. They say that they, for example, provide a scholarship, but they don't offer a scholarship after getting their status, or they don't have like a dedicated member of staff as a point of contact for refugee students. So that's one of the main things. Another thing is like actually the clash of hostile environment and the university policy. For example, the compliance and finance team, they want asylum seekers to be categorized as international students, but the widening participation try to categorize them as home students so that they can include them. So those kind of issues are also there. Some universities also reluctant. They're like, if we get this status, then we will be blamed for being political. And also another finding is the evolution of universities of sanctuary over time since 2005. Some have changed their criteria, their eligibility criteria, for example, and they don't include refugees, for example. Now they focus only on asylum seekers. And these are some of the findings around displaced students. Hostile environment is basically ever present in their daily life. If they are in the hotel, that affect their capacity to pursue higher education, and also the asylum support, which is minimum, and now it's discretionary. They could be withdrawn anyway, anytime. And the financial problem is the main problem always. Informational barriers, a lot of them, they actually don't know about the process of getting into university in the UK, and that actually takes with years of their life. Procedural challenge as well. That's the admission process is a challenge. But also not all courses are included in universities of sanctuary scholarship. They are like, you're providing the scholarship, but you cannot do dentistry, for example. You cannot do nursing, but you can do, mostly it is limited. It's not limited, but medical courses are not included mostly in so many universities. Again, it is very intersectional. It depends very much on their route of arrival. How do they come to the UK? Where do they live now? And also their experience of pre-displacement, which country they came from, how much English they know, and how much affinities there between the curriculum in this country and their home country. And finally, how this study will contribute. Well, first of all, it fills a gap on the Universities of Sanctuary provision, and the findings will hopefully be of relevance to higher education policymakers, to displaced students, to funders and advocacy organizations. And finally, hopefully, it will contribute to the debate on sanctuary as a concept and its theorization. Thank you.
Such an amazing group of different presentations with a lot of diversity, but some common themes again.